are driving a 1966 Porsche 912. I bought this car in 2023 from my father's neighbor. The car had been sitting for about 15 years at the time, and it hadn't run. There's a few issues with the carburetor, and the owner didn't really know what was going on. He wasn't too handy of a guy, but the Porsche always looked really nice sitting in his garage. So I just had to get it, had to rescue it, and I thought, you know, we'll figure out the rest later. We'll get it running and see what we're working with. We got it cleaned up, replaced a few parts, did what we could to get it running. Turns out the work that was needed was a little bit past the mechanic experience that we had, so we brought it to a local shop, and they proceeded to rebuild all the brake calipers, brake lines, brake rotors, new fuel tank, new fuel lines, rebuilt the carburetors, and did a top-end rebuild. So all new valves, valve springs. Didn't touch the bottom end, didn't really need it. Everything looked good, compression numbers were good, but the top end in this has been massaged, and it runs really well. People always wonder, is it Porsche or Porsche? How do you say it properly? And what my dad and I have distilled down to is that if you do a burnout in it, it's just a Porsche. But if you have to drive it with finesse and really work the gears, then it is a Porsche. So we call this a Porsche, and his water-cooled, we call it a Porsche because it'll do a big burnout. I grew up in Michigan, where we had muscle cars, straight roads, high horsepower, classic cars, Mustangs with big motors, V8s. It wasn't until I moved to Tennessee with windy roads that I got an appreciation for what a little bit less horsepower, less weight, and better handling can do. And now I really enjoy that. So while I still have a 65 Mustang with a stroker motor in it and enjoy doing some burnouts in it, I have an affinity for something like this 912. It weighs 2,000 pounds, give or take. It's about 90 horsepower, but has wider wheels and tires on it. And when you do hit curves, you are thankful that you have a harness in here. But it's an absolute blast to drive. Driving it through East Tennessee here in the fall time, hitting the twisty roads is an absolute joy. So this car is very easy to drive, get in. It does not overheat. If it's something to hop in, go and get groceries. You know it's always going to start. It's never going to give you any problems. If you don't know what you want to eat for dinner, but you just want to go to the grocery store and maybe look around and find a steak, it's a 2-mile trip, you know that this car is going to get you there, and it's almost like driving a normal car. No power brakes, no power steering, but the brakes are all 4 wheels, disc brakes, and the steering is manual. It's the most connected steering I've ever felt in a car, and the brakes, they brake so close to a modern car. The stopping power is great. My name is Kyle, and today I want to talk about my 1966 Porsche 912. This car I've had for about a year at this point and really enjoyed it. It was my dad's neighbor's car, and I had been looking at it sitting in his garage on jack stands for about 5 years. At that point, the car hadn't been running for about 15 years. And he was ready to move on and get another car that he could really fall in love with. So I jumped at the opportunity to purchase it. It took about 3 visits to really come to a negotiation. The car did not run. The engine would turn with the new battery, but it would not fire, it would not start. So I decided I was gonna take the risk and see what we could do and see how we could get it running. And very shortly after that, I ran out of mechanical expertise and gave it to a shop locally, and they ended up redoing all of the brakes, brake calipers, brake rotors. They redid the fuel tank, the fuel lines, full fuel system, full brake system, rebuilt the master cylinder. They ended up having to take the heads off of the car and do a top-end rebuild, as well as rebuild the carburetors. And it took it was at the shop for about 6 to 8 months. The whole time I was just hearing news about how we were getting closer, and then it was at the end of the year where they said we're just waiting on one final part, and they were able to put the engine back together, and I picked it up in the spring of 24. So ever since then, I've been putting as many miles as I could on it. It starts every time that I try to start it. It is very reliable. It does not overheat. As you know, these Porsche air-cooled engines, no radiator, no water. So very simple, and as long as things are in good shape, they're gonna be very reliable engines. This one has just shy of 100,000 miles on it, and I've really been enjoying it every step of the way. It's something that I can hop in really easily, take it to the grocery store 2 minutes away, take it downtown for a day out, hitting different spots downtown, 95 degrees, 60 degrees, 40 degrees. The car just runs really well and takes it all. Of all the cars that I have, I would say this is probably the most reliable classic that I can jump in, take it for an hour ride, and not have any worries about it. A lot of the other ones, they can get temperamental, but this one, you throw the gas at it, top off the oil if it needs anything, and it runs really well. It's 90 horsepower, it's a flat 4 engine. A lot of people say they're hopped up Volkswagen Beetles, but there's something really special about these cars. As you can see, this one has a turbo wide body on it. It had a whale tail when I first bought it, but the bumpers and the front and rear fenders are from a short hood car. The hood and the Fuchs are from a long hood car as well, all fiberglass. But the mixture of the wider tires, wider wheels really helps with the steering. Has a Momo steering wheel and shifter in it. One of the best steering cars that I've had. With a 4-point harness, it really locks you in, and you can hit those roads with the curves and have a lot of fun. Taking off from a stoplight, you're gonna struggle to keep up with a minivan at some times, but once you gain momentum, hit into turns, this car gives me a lot of joy when I get the opportunity to drive it, which lately this is the one that I keep in my garage. And like I said, long trips, short trips. So far, as long as it's not raining, this is my go-to on the weekends, almost every weekend. So this car being in 1966, it is a short wheelbase. It has 3 gauges. As they got newer, they added gauges, just like the 911s. So if we pop the trunk or slash hood, you can see it's a little flat 4, air cooled. There's 2 Weber carburetors on there, downdraft carburetors, 90 horsepower. All we gotta do is check the oil and make sure she's good, and she starts up every time. 1960s, these quarter windows, these are a big deal. These quarter windows actually open up and they vent out. This is something that, I have another car that these open up. And it just really helps out. Obviously this car doesn't have air conditioning, but it creates airflow. Again, these little quarter windows, they open up. The seats in here are aftermarket seats, the Recaros. They have a good amount of bolstering. I don't know exactly where they came from. A couple of the guys that I know that are car guys like me, they think they came from possibly an 80s BMW, but they're pretty period. They look great in the car. Most people just think they're you know, period sports seats. But this car has a classic look and feel that you just can't get from cars these days. All the cars are getting faster and faster, more horsepower, more. Now they're putting batteries in them that are, you know, lending 200, 300, 400 horsepower. The cars are losing character and what makes them special. But this is when cars were very different from each other and the brands had real identity. This car is about 2,000 pounds, so very light, 90 horsepower again. But when you start to throw it into turns, you're gonna outpace a lot of cars that have higher horsepower that are 3,000 pounds. Nowadays, a 3,000 pound car is pretty light, but so a modern car with a lot more horsepower, this car will keep up with it when it gets into the corners. It's a blast to drive. So these cars are rear engine. So the engine is actually over the back wheels. It's not mid-engine, the whole engine is actually behind the rear wheels. So this is one of the first cars that I had that rearward weight bias. Most of the cars that I've had engines in the front, and they just respond a lot differently in corners. And while you may not be able to drop the clutch and get the rear end out, when you're doing a burnout or something like this, if you approach a corner in a way that is maybe a little too much speed or you lift on the brake, these cars can just behave differently than a front engine car. And I learned that very quickly as I tried to go left through a stoplight at the speed limit, and just we're testing the boundaries of the car, and the rear end got away from me as I was slowing down, which is something that I wasn't used to feeling. But these cars, this is what they do. They keep you on your toes, and you do have to really focus when you drive them. Because it is a different experience altogether. So this type of car is not for everybody. It's, at this point, 58 years old. There are little things that are needing replacement, that are, whether it's now or will need replacement, but this car isn't necessarily for the guy who wants the highway cruiser, 600 horsepower, or the guy who wants to hit the track. This car is something that you take out on a beautiful day. You're not in a rush. You have some windy roads ahead of you. The engine, it's behind you. You hear it. All the sounds are different. The driving, you're going to hear me say driving experience a lot, because not one specific part of this car sticks out as what it should be known for, but it's really all of the parts working together to give you a satisfaction and an experience that nothing else modern can give you. So I would say this car is perfect for somebody who wants to enjoy driving and enjoy having to put in effort to understand how a car performs and get to know the character of the car, instead of just putting their right foot down and going and stopping. You have to squeeze everything out of this car, and it really bonds you to the car. This car, it is not a 911. So the 911s are very, very desirable. Those are the poster car, and those are what people know the Porsche brand for. This 912, everything about this car, when it left the factory, was the same as a 911 except for the engine. There were a few little tweaks that were different, but 99% of the car, other than the engine, was exactly the same. This was made to be the entry level into Porsche. While the air-cooled cars from the 60s, 70s through the 90s are becoming more and more desirable, you just can't replace them. This is a good way to get into air-cooled Porsche without breaking the bank. So while you do need to be able to they do cost money, right? They're going to be more than your typical Mustang, Camaro, or anything else that they made millions of, right? They made in the tens of thousands of these. If you can work on things and fix things yourself, these become a lot more accessible. It's not, again, it's not the 911, so it doesn't demand the premium that a 911 may, but it gives you all the looks. People approach this car more than any other car that I've been in. It may be because it looks old. It's not your newer water-cooled Porsche where people may have a preconceived notion about you, but this is a car where people feel comfortable approaching you saying, hey, my dad had one of those, my grandpa had one of those, and this is something that, you know, I had always wanted and always talked about wanting, and they feel really comfortable walking up and talking about this car. One of the best things about owning this car is meeting those people, young, old, men, women. People love this car and they feel comfortable approaching and starting a conversation. So I've had this car for a year now and I've enjoyed every minute that I've had it. I may not have it for forever, but my goal is to enjoy every moment that I have with it and keep it and make it better for the next person who does eventually end up with this.